The 911 operator assured me that vehicles were en route, and that I should stay at the house with my neighbor, Al, until they made sure the area was safe. Under no circumstances should I go outside until the police arrived. It all sounded normal and sensible at the time, and I had no suspicion that things would become nightmarish and lethal within minutes. Al had listened to me frantically trying to describe the situation to the 911 operator with wide eyes, his wrinkled old face showing fear and confusion. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, but I never saw him drink any of it. "Is that true?" he asked after I hung up. "Brandy and Emma are dead? You found their bodies in the woods?" I nodded grimly. I hadn't told the 911 operator about the doppelgangers in the house, or the bizarre and psychotic behavior. I figured once the police saw the bodies, the story would become a little more believable, and I didn't want to sound like a lunatic over the phone. Let the police come and think that I was some delusional maniac who had just murdered my own family, and I was trying to cover my ass by calling and reporting it. I had watched enough true crime shows to know that whenever a wife or a husband is murdered, the spouse is always the first suspect until cleared by forensic evidence or an alibi. Seemed like no time had passed when I heard tires screeching outside and vehicles pulling up in a frenzy. I looked outside, expecting to see the police lights flashing, wondering why no sirens had sounded. My heart leapt in my throat when I saw 3 black SUVs filled with men in suits. They leapt out, holding automatic rifles, and without warning, they pointed the guns at the house and began firing. 15 dark silhouettes lined up down the street outside, looking like a firing squad at a military execution. When the first bullet exploded through the wall, I was so surprised that I didn't even move. I saw Al standing there with his mouth hanging open as a bullet shattered his coffee cup, sending the steaming hot liquid all over the floor, but missing his hand entirely. A second later, another one came in and exploded through his chest. In slow motion, I saw a flower of blood blossom out of the gaping hole that suddenly appeared in the center of his heart. He didn't so much as cry out, but instead fell back instantly, moving his hands up as if in supplication as he clenched and unclenched his fingers. His mouth opened and closed slightly as a puddle of blood rapidly spread out beneath him on the linoleum floor. Then my instincts kicked in. As glass shattered and dishes exploded, light bulbs bursting all around me, I jumped to the floor, crawling towards the back door, making myself as small a target as possible. At that moment, I didn't even realize I'd dragged myself through the warm, sticky mess pooling beneath Al's still body. His pupils dilated in death and his mouth opened in surprise. The blood completely covered my white shirt and blue jeans. I dragged my arms and hands through it as light after light went out, each bulb exploding in turn as gunfire strafed across the house over and over, left to right, right to left, then left to right again. After what felt like an eternity, the shooting stopped. I'd finally reached the back door at that point. I also looked like a serial killer with my clothing, shoes, and skin mostly covered by Al's blood. It made me feel sick to my stomach, and a part of me wanted to rip the soiled clothes off and throw them outside as I went. I jumped up, flinging the door open and running out into the dark night beyond. Behind me, I heard the front door smash open as the man kicked his way inside. The last thing I heard from that house was them running from room to room yelling clear. Then I reached the border of the forest and I was swallowed up in shadows. As I wandered blindly through the trees, covered in goosebumps and sweating heavily, I heard the men destroying the back door of the house. They had apparently cleared the house and realized I was no longer inside. Reality felt like a nightmare, disoriented and surreal. I couldn't believe any of this was happening, but my instincts took over, and with the high amount of adrenaline surging through my blood, I ran like I'd never run before. The men began to come out into the forest, sprinting, turning on little LED lights attached to the end of their rifles. I had the advantage in that I knew the woods better than they did. The men certainly had me beat on physical strength and stamina, though. They all looked like gym rats, their muscles bulging under their black suits, their thick bodies striding forward with purpose. They all stood tall and still for a moment as their cold, killer's eyes surveyed the surroundings, reptilian and emotionless. I heard more SUVs coming to a screeching halt in front of my house, and soon the sounds of many dogs barking echoed across the forest. I knew they were tracking me, knew they'd find me and kill me. No one would ever know what had happened here, least of all me, and no one would ever be able to prevent it from happening again with the destruction of the sole living witness to this bizarre replacement of my family. I ran towards a large rock formation I knew nearby, with small indentions allowing a man to fit in the wide cracks of the 30-foot-tall cylinder of stone. This was a place I liked to come and sit during happier times, sometimes just meditating and listening to the sound of birds and breathing in the clean air of the woods. Now, I hoped in my time of desperation that it would come to my aid again. I heard the dogs getting closer and saw the lights separating into smaller and smaller groups as the agents combed every inch of the woods, sweeping their rifles up and down and left and right as they looked in every crevice and behind every tree. I saw a single light draw near me. My heart seemed to stop. I knelt down low, feeling the ground with my trembling fingers. I found a large, flat stone that must have weighed a good 10 pounds. Making myself as small a target as possible, I waited for the figure to pass right by my hiding spot. Even though this happened a couple of months ago now, I still remember the rising waves of anxiety that gripped my heart as this assassin stood before me. As soon as the light began to turn to examine the dark corner of the indention, I sprang forward, waves of adrenaline giving me amazing strength and reflexes. The man saw me at the last moment, his eyes widening as his fingers began to tighten on the trigger. As I smashed his skull in with the rock, his neck twisted to the side, his eyes instantly dropping as his body went slack. I dropped the rock onto the leaf-strewn ground and caught him in the same movement, dragging his limp body back into the shadowy groove of the rock where I hid. I took the automatic rifle off of him, flicked off the light, and felt around on his belt for extra ammunition. I found 3 little clips. I fumbled around until I found the latch to release the magazines, unclipping them one after another and shoving them into my pockets. The man quickly started to stir, groaning and moving his head slowly from side to side, his eyes still clenched shut. Oh, my head. Jesus, what? His blue eyes suddenly opened, and he looked directly at me, an icy hatred changing his expression in a single moment. It's you, Julius Thorne. He spat my name like venom, staring directly at me. Even his blood trickled down his cheeks and forehead. Yeah, it's me. The hell is going on right now? Why did you psychopaths murder my neighbor and try to kill me? He just shook his head and kept his mouth tightly shut. I waited a few seconds, giving him a chance to answer. When I realized he wasn't planning on talking, I sighted, steeling myself for what I knew I had to do. Raising the rifle up above my head, I quickly brought the butt of the gun down into the center of his nose. I heard it crunch, a fountain of blood exploding from the front of his face. He started to open his mouth to scream, but I turned the gun around and pointed it straight into his right eye. If you scream, I'll kill you right here. I have nothing to lose right now, and I'd rather go down fighting. He bit his lip so deeply that a small trickle of blood began to stream down his chin, but he didn't scream or cry out, despite the immense pain he looked to be in. Now, maybe we can try again. Why did you guys want to kill me? Why are you chasing me? We're agents who are tasked with detecting and destroying anomalies that have arisen across the United States, he said, scowling at me with hatred, his words coming out somewhat distorted as he constantly spat blood. People usually call us the cleaners. Mostly we deal with incidents in small towns like this one, though sometimes shit hits the fan in big cities too. Hell, just last week we had a werewolf in New York. Press thought it was some serial killer who ripped apart his victims with a knife, but Any coroner worth his salt would know immediately what he was looking at. But we found him and brought him in for containment. He had already killed 3 joggers and 7 homeless people by then. Yeah? What does that have to do with me? I asked furiously. I hated these men so badly at that moment. I had asked for help, and instead, assassins had come to my side. Your wife and daughter are dead, but you're not the first one to call to say you found graves in the forest. In every other case, the police found the people still alive and healthy in the house, and the graves are totally empty by the time we got there. But there were always indications that the individuals still living had changed. They always began to show psychotic and violent behavior, and inevitably, they would kill their own family members, neighbors, hell, anyone in the area. When the anomaly is allowed to proceed, the entire town often ends up being destroyed. We lost over 10,000 people in a single incident last year, so we come in and contain it by killing anyone associated with the anomaly, stop it from spreading, because it does spread, and it seems to spread by association. It started with a couple of people on the street, then the rest of their house, then their next door neighbors. Keeps going outward like ripples spreading through a pond. By this point, I heard dogs getting closer and closer. I saw lights flashing through the trees in the distance, aimed in my direction. I quickly ripped the strip of fabric from the agent's shirt and tied his hands and feet before binding his mouth so he couldn't scream. I knew they'd still probably find him within about 10 minutes, so that might be all I needed to get out of here. Now, at least I had a gun. I sprinted out into the woods, taking the trail in the opposite direction of the agents. I had to move in the dark, which slowed me down significantly, but I'd been on these trails 1,000 times before. Soon, the shouting of men and the barking of dogs grew fainter behind me, and I came out on an empty roadside. I knew the area well. Richie lived only a few blocks from me. Without thinking, I began to stagger down the road. The streetlights flashed on and off before me. I saw faces peering out the windows as I passed. I must have looked like a madman, being totally covered in blood with wide, panicked eyes that constantly snapped in the direction of the smallest sound. Yet amazingly, not a single person came out of their house. I wondered how many of the faces were just those who were replaced doppelgangers, with the right human skin but without any real human mind, except maybe for its most destructive and insane impulse. Within minutes, I found myself stumbling through Richie's front yard towards his little ranch house, a massive wraparound porch with pillars painted white in front of the light blue siding. He had Halloween decorations all over the place. Scarecrows were crucified in the front yard, fake blood streaming from their hands and feet. A massive painting of a reptilian humanoid with black, shining eyes and tentacles coming out of its mouth stood in front of the porch, like some nightmare from an H.P. Lovecraft story. Fake gravestones were lined up, row after row of gray foam with skeleton hands rising from the grass in front of them. I saw a plume of smoke rising from a chimney connected to the fireplace, the smell of wood smoke and decaying autumn leaves mixing with a pleasant scent that always reminded me of Halloween. I pounded on the door until Richie came and opened it, his eyes widening as he saw me. "Holy crap, Thorne, what happened?" he asked. I pushed past him, looking back furtively at the street and the dark forest stretching out before us. Hidden dangers seemed to be everywhere. "Close the door," I told him. He quickly shut it and turned the deadbolt. He turned to me, his face pale, a shocked expression. Are you hurt? Whose blood is that? Is it yours?" "No," I said curtly, shaking my head. "I don't have time to explain it all now. Some men are after me. I think they're from the government. My neighbor's dead. My family's dead. I broke it down for him, crying. I need help. I really, really need help right now." Okay, I believe you," he said reassuringly, putting a hand on my shoulder. "It's gonna be okay. That's a nice gun, by the way," he said, giving me a calming smile. I'd clearly forgotten about the automatic rifle slung over my shoulder. I looked down at it with a blank expression, as if I had just discovered a new limb on my body. "Hey, how about we get you a change of clothes, and then we'll figure out what to do. Come with me to my room. I think you're about my size." I gratefully followed him. He gave me an old t-shirt and a hoodie and a pair of jeans. I stripped off my bloody clothes, feeling how the drying, coagulating blood cracked under my dirt-stained fingers as I took them off. I felt a small sense of hope as I put on the clean clothes. I had my friend here with me now. I'd escaped. I wasn't alone in this anymore. At that moment, I heard a knock at the front door. It sounded light and hesitant, like the knocking of a small child. I walked quickly out of the room and saw Richie standing there, the front door standing wide open, a nightmarish shape standing on the porch. It looked like a person, but deep, blackened burns covered every inch of its skin. Only the eyes still had humanity left, two shining pits of despair with green irises and massively dilated pupils. They constantly teared up and rolled from side to side in agony. The person held out their arm in front of them, as if there were so much pain that they didn't even want their arm to touch their body. I couldn't tell the race or the gender of the person through the immense damage to their body. Yellowish fluid mixed with the bright trails of blood seeping from the cracks of their destroyed skin. It constantly moaned, the weeping wounds all over its body, crying constantly, and the smell of smoke and gasoline radiated off the dying person on the porch. "Ugh! Oh God, help, please!" "My God," Richie said, putting his hand to his mouth. "Jesus, we need an ambulance here immediately." He furiously checked his pockets, then he spun, his eyes blind with panic. "My phone's upstairs. We need to call 911 right away." "No, Richie," I screamed. "When I called 911, the men came and tried to kill me. They're not on our side." I wished I had more time to explain. Richie heard the note of panic in my voice. His face was covered in a sheen of sweat, and the anxiety I felt seemed reflected in his expression. Well, we have to do something," he said, a pleading tone in his voice. He looked like he wanted to turn and run away from the whole situation. Then he stopped and stared at the figure more closely. "Oh God, is that you, Melissa?" With those words, my heart jumped in my throat. I turned to the figure with newfound horror. Melissa and Richie had dated for nearly a year. Looking close at the figure, I could see that it did appear to be a woman, at least as far as I could tell, from the curve of its body under the blackened skin. Melissa was white and thin, about 5'6". This thing, with third-degree burns all over its body, was certainly the right height and build. "It hurts," she said, her voice gurgling and loud. "It hurts. It hurts so bad. Kill me. Please kill me." She waved her arms as if trying to cool with the crisp autumn air. "That's it. I'm calling an ambulance," Richie said, running past me. I followed closely behind him, leaving the door wide open. We went upstairs. He pulled his phone from the charger and opened it, dialing 911. He frowned, listening for what seemed like a long time. Then he gave me the phone. As I listened to it, my ears heard an emotionless message read by a robot with a woman's voice coming through. "Stay in your homes until the situation is resolved. Thank you for your help in these trying times." Then it began to repeat, starting at the beginning. "This is a recording. Emergency services in your area have been temporarily suspended. Help is on the way. Under Executive Order 718, martial law has been declared in your area. Until it arrives, please keep your doors locked and your windows closed. Stay in your home until the situation is resolved." What is this?" Richie said, infuriated. "What do they mean, emergency services are temporarily suspended?" Why don't we just take her straight to the hospital?" I asked. His eyes brightened at that. Yeah, let's do that. What other choice do we have? She needs help immediately. She's gonna die without it," he said gloomily, his eyes growing moist. "But the phone says to stay inside." "I really hate to say it, but I think she's gonna die regardless. No one can survive third-degree burns over the vast majority of their body." We moved back downstairs, the phone in Richie's hand. As we came down, we realized the front door was still open. Melissa was gone. I ran forward, seeing blood drops and pus on the deck where she had stood, yet there was no sign of her. Where could she have gone? She couldn't have walked far in her condition. I was amazed that she was still conscious at all. She must have been in the worst pain imaginable. I saw a figure walking up the porch stairs. I sighed, thinking Melissa had come back, and she had, in a way. She stood before us now, fully healed, her clothes new and unburnt. She had an ear-to-ear grin across her face, and she kept one hand behind her back. "Richie," she said slowly, as if tasting the word. "Oh, Richie, I'm so happy to see you. A lot of strange things have happened tonight." Richie's eyes glistened as tears began to slide down his face. "Melissa, oh my God, it's really you, isn't it?" "Of course it is, baby," she said, moving a lock of blonde hair off her face with her left hand. Her right stayed behind her back. She talked like Melissa. She even seemed to have some of her mannerisms, but in her wide, staring eyes there was a look of bloodlust and lunacy. "Richie, stay back," I said. "That's not Melissa." But he ran forward, crying, his arms outstretched. I don't even know if he heard what I'd said. When he crossed the threshold of the door, Melissa pulled her hands from behind her back, revealing a huge, blood-stained butcher's knife. Raising it high, she ran forward, her eyes as cold as the vast empty space between worlds. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Saikat, Lee Kendall, Janet, and Chris Kinsella for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And, of course, thanks to Xaronan, Winter, Tyler Parker, Stephanie Carrington, Sarah ASMR, Hi Stacy, Emily Coltsfoot, and Cinnamon Fox, and Bella Lee for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. As I said, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of every episode that I make, and maybe get a little more, come on down to Patreon and sign up, or become a member on YouTube. Ghostly Reader tier contributors get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and give it a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.